Imagine this. You board a plane on a warm evening in 1987. You fasten your seatbelt. You glance out the small oval window and see the endless stretch of rainforest below, an emerald sea swallowing the horizon. Families are laughing. Children are pressing their faces against the glass. Flight attendants are smiling as they prepare for takeoff. And then, hours later, everything vanishes. Not just you. Not just your seatmates. An entire aircraft carrying over 120 lives disappears into thin air. No distress call, no wreckage, nothing but silence. Now ask yourself, if this happened in your country, if an entire flight went missing in the skies above your home, what would you do? How would you react if your loved one was on board? Before we begin, tell me this in the comments. Where in the world are you watching from right now? Which country are you in? Make sure to subscribe and join us on this journey, because tonight, we're diving into one of the strangest unsolved mysteries in aviation history. Some call it a tragedy. Others call it a cover-up. Many believe it was something far darker, but one truth remains. The ghost flight of 1987 was never found. It was June 7, 1987, a humid Sunday evening in Manaus, Brazil, the heart of the Amazon. The airport was crowded with families, businessmen, and tourists, all waiting for a routine domestic flight bound for Rio de Janeiro. The aircraft, a mid-sized commercial jet operated by a regional airline, looked ordinary in every sense. You can almost picture it, the fluorescent lights buzzing above the terminal, the low hum of announcements echoing across the halls, the smell of coffee mixed with jet fuel in the air. People rushing, children crying, luggage wheels clattering against tiled floors. Inside the waiting lounge, passengers lined up at Gate 4. Some carried gifts wrapped in colorful paper. Others clutched briefcases. A group of teenagers, likely on their first flight, snapped photographs with disposable cameras, laughing nervously. For most of them, this was supposed to be a simple 2.5-hour trip. Nothing out of the ordinary, but what none of them knew was that this plane would never reach its destination. The boarding call echoed. Flight 508 to Rio de Janeiro is now boarding. Rows of passengers stepped forward. Flight attendants, dressed in crisp uniforms, greeted each traveler with practiced smiles. Inside the cabin, the air smelled faintly of leather seats and stale recycled oxygen. You slide into your seat, maybe 17A, by the window. Outside, the tarmac glistens under faint airport floodlights. A drizzle has started, soft rain tapping against the fuselage. The crew prepared for takeoff. Safety demonstrations. Seatbelts clicked. Engines roared to life. The ground trembled as the aircraft rolled down the runway. And within seconds, it was airborne, climbing above the city, swallowed by the darkness of the jungle night. At 8:47 p.m., Flight 508 established its course toward Rio. Everything was normal, but in less than 2 hours, everything would change. At 10:14 p.m., air traffic controllers in Brasilia received a routine transmission from the flight. The captain's voice was calm, professional. No signs of stress. He confirmed their altitude, weather conditions, and expected arrival time. Then, silence. Controllers waited for the next scheduled check-in. It never came. They attempted radio contact. Nothing. At first, they assumed atmospheric interference. Storms over the Amazon often disrupted signals. But when radar screens began to flicker, controllers realized something was terribly wrong. The green blip representing Flight 508 vanished. Not slowly, not gradually, instantly. The jet was gone. Imagine being one of those air traffic controllers. 1 second, the plane is there, flying steadily, no signs of distress. The next, it has vanished from every screen. Phones rang. Supervisors rushed in. Military contacts were alerted. Try again. Try again, one controller reportedly said, as his colleague frantically adjusted the dials, but the airwaves remained. Thunk. By 10:30 p.m., the flight was declared missing. The search began. Helicopters lifted off before dawn. Boats patrolled the winding rivers. Soldiers marched into the rainforest, machetes in hand, cutting through thick vines and swarms of insects. Day after day, the search expanded. But the Amazon is unlike anywhere else on Earth. The canopy is so dense that even satellites struggle to see through it. Trees stretch for miles, blotting out the sun. Rivers twist like serpents, swallowing evidence in their muddy depths. If a plane had gone down, surely something would be visible. A wing, a trail of smoke, a burn mark in the foliage. But there was nothing. No debris, no bodies, no black box. It was as if the aircraft had simply dissolved into the night air. As search teams fanned out, strange stories began to surface. Villagers from remote river communities claimed they had seen a flash of light streak across the sky. Some said it was followed by a loud crack like thunder. Others whispered that they heard cries echoing through the jungle at night, only to vanish moments later. And then there were the most chilling reports, a glowing mist hanging low over the treetops, lingering for hours after the plane was lost. Was it lightning? Was it smoke? Or was it something far stranger? Meanwhile, in Rio, families gathered at the arrivals gate, clutching flowers and signs, waiting for their loved ones. The digital display still read, "On time." But hours passed. Then came the announcement, "We regret to inform you, Flight 528 is missing." Screams echoed through the terminal. Some fainted, others demanded answers, but there were none. By the second week of searching, investigators faced a grim reality. Nothing had been found. No wreckage. No fuel slick. No smoke rising from the forest. This wasn't just a crash. It was a disappearance. And that's when the theories began to spread. Some whispered of hijacking, that armed men had forced the pilot to land on a hidden airstrip deep in the jungle. Others suspected government secrecy. The Amazon was known for clandestine military operations, and Cold War experiments weren't out of the question. But then came the strangest idea of all, that Flight 508 had slipped into another dimension. And here's the most unsettling part. In all the decades since, not a single trace has ever been recovered. No black box, no flight recorder, no human remains. It was as though the aircraft had been erased from reality itself. But then, 2 months later, a fisherman on the Rio Negro swore he found something floating downstream, something that looked very familiar. Dawn stains the Rio Negro in copper and smoke as a wooden skiff pushes through the mist, its motor coughing like an old smoker, its wake carving a pale V across black water that swallows every secret hole. You can smell diesel and wet leaves, and the faint sweetness of crushed limes in a net bag, because the river always smells like life trying not to become memory. He is alone. A fisherman in a sun-faded cap, the bill chewed by years of weather and boredom. His name is Joan to the men at the dock, and the one who keeps to himself to the reseller who buys his catch. He stands with one hand on the tiller and one hand braced against the gunwale, eyes searching for the quick silver flicker of Dorado, and for the other things the river surrenders only when it's tired of keeping them. You imagine being in that boat, knees brushing a crate of nets, hearing the motor fall to a soft grumble as Joan cuts power and drifts past a snag of brown limbs that claw up from the surface like a warning. You lean over the side. A scrap of fabric shivers against a branch like a flag trying to remember what country it belongs to. And then you see it. Not a fish. Not a log. A cushion. White once. Stained now. The foam inside gone yellow like old teeth, the cover punctured by something round and angry and unforgiving. On the corner, so faint you could convince yourself you're dreaming it, there is an emblem, a stylized river bird in flight, wings swept back toward a horizon it will never reach. But wait, there's more caught below it in the branches where the current keeps a cluttered memory box of the things people meant to bring home. A plastic safety whistle on a frayed cord, a scrap of laminated paper with tiny squares no bigger than postage stamps, diagrams of exits, arrows, smiling stick figures who will never smile again. And Joan, who barely finished school and rarely finishes a story, looks at the cushion as if it is staring back at him. He reaches down with the boat hook, he drags it aboard. He knows what it is before he says it because everyone in Manaus knows the story by now and pretends they don't when the rain gets hard. A seat cushion, the river says, if you know how to listen. But the river never speaks just once. He takes the cushion to the local post on a Tuesday, because Tuesday is when the officer who does the paperwork is mostly sober. The room smells of paper and metal, and the fan above has 3 speeds: off, almost, and maybe. João places the cushion on a dented desk. The officer prods it with a pen. He writes something short. He calls someone long. By afternoon, a man in a crisp shirt with a badge that is not from here comes in with a second man who carries a camera and never lifts it to his face. They ask João where he found it. They ask him to circle the spot on a map that looks like a spider dyed on paper. They nod and write and nod again until the nodding means nothing. They take the cushion. They do not give a receipt. And that's all? You ask the archive because later, years later, you will listen to the taped interview with João that survived moths and mildew in a shoebox wrapped in string. They just took it? They took it, João says on the tape that crackles like a storm that never ends. And they said, thank you for helping, and they said, you did the right thing, and then they said, don't go back there for a while. As if the river belonged to anyone at all, but wait. There's something else João kept and never mentioned until a different Tuesday, when he thought no one was listening. Not the cushion, not the whistle. A sliver of laminated paper, folded small and hidden in the lining of his cap, kept there because he didn't trust men who wore badges like armor. On the paper, 3 letters and 4 numbers printed in a font meant to be ignored. The last 3 digits on a maintenance card that should have been bolted inside the seat back, never to meet sun or river or rumor. The numbers match the series used by the airline that night. Not proof, not certainty, just a bruise in the right place. And suddenly, silence starts to look like policy. You travel by voice before you travel by boat, because that is how this story survives. Recorded whispers, brittle clippings, the testimony of people who don't want to be right. You hear from a junior air traffic controller who remembers a blip that shivered before it died. You hear from a paramedic who says the military loaded crates at dawn and told everyone to clap when they were done. You hear from a mother who never remarried and sleeps now with the television on, because in the television people land. Her name is Renata. She holds a photo in both hands as if the edges will cut her free. The picture is a hallway in an airport where the floor shines and no one looks down. Her boy is in it, 6 years old, wearing a little collared shirt with a dinosaur stitched near the pocket. He is pointing at the camera because he thinks joy is a proof of life. You pause the tape. You look at the boy, then you look away. Because if you keep looking, the story cannot continue, but wait. Listen to the paramedic again, the one who remembers the crates. They said there was nothing. He tells you in a voice as soft as gauze. They said there was no debris. But I carried a roll of plastic and a box of evidence slips down to the dock, and when we came back, the box was empty, and the slips were gone. Question: if there is nothing, why label it? The boat you hire to revisit João's spot is wider and shorter than his, with a motor that doesn't smoke and a pilot who doesn't speak. The river is higher now, the rain bolder, the trees closer, as if the forest has decided to reclaim the sky. You move through water that looks black because it is not afraid of who it reflects. At the bend João circled, the current tugs like a child. Vines net the surface. A kingfisher detonates into air, a blue spark flying upstream. There is a hush, here that isn't quiet. A pressure, a held breath, a reluctance to commit to sound. You dip a pole into the water and feel something catch, something that flexes instead of breaks. You lift, and branches rise with a slow, sucking reluctance, streaming with beetles and bits of leaf. There, knotted into vine, is a strip of gray composite with a line of countersunk holes along one edge, a curve too precise for trees. No markings, no serials. No story that wants to tell itself. A forensic tech back in the city will later shrug and say it could be from anything: a boat, a plane, a dream. But in your hand, slick with the river, it feels like a sentence missing only its verb. And that's when Jerome points with his chin to the bank, where the mud remembers footprints longer than memory. 2 sets, not fishermen, boots with a tread like teeth. And between the 2 sets, pressed hard like an oath, the chevron bite of a crate corner. But, wait, whoever was here did not come by water. There is a path, narrow, mean, cleared not by machete but by heat. You step onto ash where ferns should be. You smell diesel that is too fresh to blame on yesterday. You push through to a clearing and see the ghost of a runway, a strip no longer than a desperate thought, pinned between trees, gravel bleeding, through char. On the edge of the clearing, half buried and half burned, you find a metal placard, blistered and unreadable. There's a corner where the flame blinked first. 7, 8. Sir. The tech will try to lift letters later with acid and prayer. He will fail. But the shape, the font, the thickness, someone swears it's aerospace, someone else swears it's agricultural. And the man with the badge who is not from here swears he never saw you hold it at all. Back in Manaus, a radio amateur named Felipe plays you a recording. He swears he captured the night the sky went dumb. It sounds like rain poured through copper. It sounds like a voice learning to drown. There is a pattern in the noise that steals your breath while pretending it's only static. Listen, he says, tapping a pen to mark the seconds. There. Do. You hear it? Short, long, short. Long, short, long. A cadence that, if you squint with your ears, becomes numbers and letters and then numbers again. You map it. You plot it. You tell yourself it's drift. You tell yourself you're hunting familiar shapes in a night of stars. The sequence resolves to a coordinate that doesn't make sense, and then suddenly does. A rectangle of jungle flagged, as restricted in 1986 for communications research, the kind of phrasing that sends a chill through honest men, and a thrill through those who've learned how to find doors where none are drawn. You look at the rectangle on the map. You look at the vanished blip. You press 2 transparencies together until they make one picture. And for a minute, just one, you believe you see the shape of a corridor carved through air itself. But wait. Why would a corridor need guardians? You meet a meteorologist named Dr. Bianchi, who studies things that should not exist. Sky rivers that wander, pockets of charged air that eat radio for breakfast and leave contrails with no planes attached. He shows you plots of the night. In question, wide bands of convective thunderstorm backed by a dry slot like a secret spine. Here, he says, circling a notch in the data where signal fell and never climbed. We call these shadow windows. Windows to what? You ask, half joking because you've learned to laugh at the questions that keep you awake. To nowhere, he says. To nowhere, and then if you're lucky, back. His finger taps the notch. His eyes never leave yours. Not that night. Renata sends you a copy of a letter she never mailed, written the week after the disappearance, folded and refolded until the edges turned soft. It is addressed to no one. To whoever answers the sky. She writes about a lunchbox that smells like mango. She writes about shoes left beside the door because muddy tracks mean a family lives here. She writes about a dinosaur stitched on a pocket because boys point to what they love and expect it to come when called. At the bottom, she draws a small plane and then scribbles it out, ashamed of trusting pictures more than words. You close the letter. You put it back in its envelope, which is also a coffin, and then you notice something you didn't at first. On the back flap, pencil, almost erased, almost too faint to be anything at all, she has written the 3 letters and 4 numbers. You found in Joam's cap, the same sequence. How did she know? The pilot who doesn't speak agrees to take you one last time, upriver and then left, deeper into the trees where the map curls into myth. You bring a handheld receiver that chirps when it shouldn't and stays silent when it should sing. You bring a camera, but the lens fogs in the humidity, as if the air wants the picture more than you do. The sky drops without warning. Rain prints, the river in Braille. Lightning finds a tree and teaches it humility. The pilot throttles down. The motor coughs and steadies and coughs again, which is when you hear it. The slow, wide heartbeat of a rotor that doesn't belong to you. A helicopter. Gray where the sky is gray. Low enough to part leaves, high enough to ignore you. No markings. No numbers. No interest in the laws that make smaller men polite. It tracks the river. It falters at the bend João circled. It holds there, as if listening. And then your radio dies. Not a fade. Not a crackle. A cut. The pilot doesn't look at you, and you don't look at him. Because looking makes a moment real, and some moments are safer in the subjunctive. You try the handset again. It gives you back your own breathing. Which is when João lifts his eyes to the canopy and finally says a word he hasn't said since the day he handed over the cushion. Ellis, he whispers, them. But wait, it isn't until you beach the skiff on a spit of mud to wait out the rain that you see the final, impossible thing. A bottle lodged like a promise in the roots of a strangler fig, its neck packed with wax and its glass clouded by time. Inside, the torn corner of a safety card, a ribbon of cloth and a wisp of paper with pencil deeply pressed by a hand that needed the words to matter. 4 digits, 3 letters, and a set of coordinates that are not on any commercial chart. You wipe the fog from the bottle with your sleeve. You raise your eyes to the tree line where the helicopter hangs like a held breath. The receiver in your hand remains dead, heavy, intimate. You ask yourself, if you open the bottle, do you finally open the door? And that is when the helicopter's lights go out, both of them, leaving only the sound of blades and rain, and a silence so precise it can only be made by design. Dikau. Skiff drifts an inch, then another, then stops as if the river too is listening. And in that manufactured night, as you press the bottle to your chest, something, somewhere, clicks. As if a lock has recognized its key. You clutch the bottle as if it has a pulse, glass slippery with rain, wax seal softening against your thumb. The river is louder now, but inside your head it is silent, so silent you can hear your heartbeat arguing with itself. What would you do? Would you break the seal and read the message that someone somewhere wanted you to find? Or would you wait, afraid that truth is sometimes more violent than ignorance? Because here's the thing. Some stories are safer when they stay buried, but you didn't come this far to stay safe. You pry the wax with your knife. It flakes, stubborn but brittle, like it's been here longer than it should. You tip the bottle and coax out its contents, a strip of cloth, faded and stained, a corner of a safety card. The same diagram João showed you weeks ago, only this one torn across a figure's chest as if someone wanted to erase the body. And then the note. Pencil. Strokes pressed hard, letters uneven, as though the hand that wrote them was shaking or rushing or both. 3 letters. 4 digits. The same sequence again. And below it, coordinates. Not latitude and longitude written in clean decimals. No, this is older, military style, broken into blocks. But when you line them up against a current map, they point to a very specific patch of jungle, a rectangle marked restricted airspace. At night, back in Manaus, you spread charts across a motel bed that smells of mildew and rain. Your hands trace the coordinates again and again, as if repetition might turn fiction into fact. The spot lies 300 kilometers northeast of where Flight 508 should have been, a place with no towns, no roads, no reason to exist on paper. But there it is. And the strangest part? Old maps from the 1970s don't list anything there. New maps after 1990 don't list anything either. Only maps from the late 1980s, right around the time of the disappearance, show a tiny grid, marked only with 2 letters, AIR. What does AR stand for? Air Research, Abandoned Runway, Amazon Reserve, or something else? When you show the coordinates to the quiet pilot, the man who ferries you upriver without questions, his eyes flicker for the first time. He shakes his head. No fly, he says, his accent thick, his voice low. Not safe. You press him. You offer money. He shakes his head again. Eelies. Them. That's all he says. But wait. If even the locals fear to go, what kind of secret sleeps in that rectangle of jungle? In Brasilia, you dig deeper. Through archives, through newspaper microfilm, through the dust of 100 unanswered questions, and you find a name. Captain Alvaro Mendez, retired Air Force. In 1988, he filed a confidential report about irregular aviation activity near the same coordinates. You track him down. An old man now living in a yellow house with bars on the windows. He invites you in reluctantly, pours you coffee, and sets down the cup with hands that still shake. I followed the signal, he says. Same as you. The coordinates pointed to a facility. Concrete, barbed wire, men with rifles. What kind of facility, you ask? His eyes drift to the window. One that shouldn't exist. He leans closer. His voice drops. I heard engines that weren't ours. I saw wreckage they swore wasn't there. A piece of fuselage, painted, white with a logo scraped half off by fire. I knew what I saw, I reported it. 2 weeks later, they closed the file. They told me never to ask again. And then he shows you something he's kept all these years. A photograph. Grainy, black and white, a rectangle of jungle, a strip of concrete, and at the far edge, blurred but undeniable, the curve of an aircraft's tail, not a complete plane, just a fragment. But it carries the same emblem, a riverbird in flight. Back in Rio, the families never stopped asking. They wrote letters. They held vigils. They begged the government to resume the search. One mother chained herself to the airport gates with a sign that read, "Where is my son?" But answers never came. Instead, whispers did. Whispers of cover-ups, whispers of secret flights, whispers that some passengers might not have died at all, that they were taken somewhere else. And here's where the story shifts, from tragedy to terror. Because 3 years later, in 1990, a missionary trekking through the upper reaches of the Rio Japurá reported stumbling upon something he could never forget. A clearing, rusted fencing, and in the center, a fuselage split like a carcass. When he returned with others weeks later, the clearing was gone. Trees stood where he swore wreckage had been. Did the jungle reclaim it? Or was it taken away, piece by piece, by those who never wanted the truth seen? And then, this is the part that chills even seasoned investigators. Months after the missionary's account, a package arrived at a newspaper office in Manaus. No return address. No note. Inside, a single Polaroid. A Polaroid showing rows of airline seats ripped from their bolts lined up like pews in the middle of the jungle. And if you squint hard enough, if you dare, you can see something written on the back of one headrest. It isn't Portuguese. It isn't English. It's 3 letters, 4 numbers, the same sequence again. But what does it mean? And who keeps leaving it behind? The photograph of the seats won't leave your mind. Rows of cushions lined up like an abandoned church in the middle of the forest. The backs scorched, the windows behind them missing. And that code, 3 letters, 4 numbers, etched where it didn't belong. You tell yourself it's impossible. Planes don't just vanish, wreckage doesn't simply move on its own. But in the Amazon, reality bends like the river, and the deeper you dig, the stranger the whispers become. It begins with a man who doesn't want to talk, a retired soldier. He meets you in a bar lit only by yellow bulbs and cigarette smoke. Swears he was there. Deployed during the initial search in 1987, we found nothing, he says. But that was the order, nothing. Even if we saw it, we didn't. You lean closer. What do you mean? His eyes narrow. On the 5th day, we found wreckage, metal, a wing fragment, burned. But when we radioed it in, the commander told us to cover it with palm leaves and leave. Hours later, trucks arrived, men we didn't know, not army, not police, different. They loaded everything and left before nightfall. He takes a sip of beer, hand trembling. They said it was classified. They said the passengers weren't, ours to find. And then there are the children. In a village north of the river, you meet 2 brothers, now grown men. Back then, they were just kids playing outside on the night Flight 508 disappeared. They remember thunder. They remember a flash of light. And then, voices. Voices drifting from the jungle. Dozens of them calling, crying, overlapping like a chorus of fear. Their parents told them it was the wind, but even now the brothers swear the voices were real. And here's the part that makes your skin crawl. They both remember a woman's voice shouting a word that didn't exist in their language, a word that sounded like the very same letters, written on the scraps you found again and again. In a small Amazonian mission, you speak to a priest who lowers his voice before he answers. Some wreckage was brought here, he says. Years later, a crate delivered by men with no insignia. They asked us to store it beneath the church. They said it was debris. But when I pried it open, inside was a row of oxygen masks and a torn section of fuselage. Where is it now? You ask. He shakes his head. Gone. Taken back. They came one night with trucks. They said we were never to speak of it. He stares at you. But I've waited years for someone else to ask, so now you have my answer. But wait, what if this wasn't just a cover-up? What if the plane didn't crash at all? What if it was pulled deliberately into something else? Back in São Paulo, a physicist named Dr. Carvalho meets you in a cluttered office. He studies atmospheric anomalies. He leans over a chart and points at June 7, 1987. On that night, he says, the Amazon was experiencing an unprecedented geomagnetic storm. The air above certain regions was electrically charged in ways we still don't understand. He shows you data, spikes, surges, blackouts. This isn't just turbulence. Planes can disappear from radar during events like these. But the odd part is, we found no evidence of debris. None. He looks at you, eyes sharp. Sometimes the jungle doesn't just hide things. Sometimes the sky does. And then there is Renata, the mother who still keeps her son's photo. She calls you late at night, her voice trembling. I had a dream, she says. I saw the plane, whole, standing in a field. All the passengers were inside. They looked at me through the windows, but they didn't move. As if frozen, as if waiting. You want to tell her it was just grief, but her words echo something you've already heard from a different witness, a hunter who claimed he stumbled upon a silent plane in the forest, but ran before getting closer. Different people. Different places. The same vision. A plane. Intact. Passengers. Waiting. And then comes the recording. An anonymous cassette mailed to a journalist in 1991. On it, static, cracking, but buried beneath for just 5 seconds, a voice, a woman. Breathing hard, whispering in English. We're still here. The tape cuts. The envelope had no return address, no fingerprints, no explanation. Only one thing was written on the label. The same 3 letters. The same 4 numbers. The code. Again. But this time, spoken by the lost themselves. The cassette still hums in your ears long after the tape ends. We're still here. You replay it again and again, searching for hidden layers, for proof that grief hasn't warped your hearing. But the voice is always the same. Raw, trembling, desperate. A woman alive in a place she should not be. And if the tape is real, then the official story is a lie. In Brasilia, you file a request under transparency laws. You ask for every scrap connected to Flight 508. Weeks later, a padded envelope arrives. Inside, photocopies, pages with black bars blotting out whole paragraphs, entire sentences gone, names erased. One document mentions unidentified airborne activity logged near the flight path. Another lists retrieval operations in a restricted zone, but the location is redacted. And then you see a phrase circled in red by someone before you. Recovered material. Non-disclosable. Recovered material? From where? From what? But every follow-up request is denied. Every door closes. And when you try to reach the officials who signed the documents, their phones ring once, then fall into silence. In the archives, you stumble across an article draft never published. It's dated 1988, written by a young reporter from Manaus named Gabriel Duarte. The draft claims that foreign personnel were seen in the jungle weeks after the disappearance, loading crates marked with U.S. insignia onto cargo planes. Duarte even included sketches of debris, a torn airline seat, an oxygen mask, fragments of fuselage, but the article never saw print. And Duarte? He disappeared later that same year. Officially, he drowned on a fishing trip, but no body was ever recovered. And here's the detail that twists your stomach. In Duarte's notes, scribbled in the margins, are the same 3 letters and 4 numbers. The code again. How did he know? And who wanted him silenced? Through whispers, you track down a retired airline captain named Santiago. He agrees to meet only if you leave your recorder off. He lowers his voice and tells you this. Flight 508 wasn't supposed to exist. That night, there were 2 flights filed under nearly identical numbers. 1 passenger manifest, 1 military manifest, both using the same corridor. He looks at you with tired eyes. One of them never came back. You ask him which one vanished. The passenger flight or the other? But he only shakes his head. Don't ask me to say it, I've lived long enough to know silence is safer. Months later, an unmarked envelope arrives at your hotel. Inside, a single photograph. It shows the interior of a cargo hangar, crates stacked in neat rows, and at the far wall, a section of fuselage draped with tarp. But the tarp doesn't hide everything. On the visible side, faint but unmistakable, is the logo of the airline that operated Flight 508, the same riverbird emblem João saw on the cushion. On the back of the photo, a scrawled message. They hid it here. Don't stop looking. When you present the photo to authorities, their response is swift and cold. This image is fabricated, they insist. The disappearance of Flight 508 remains unexplained, but no debris has ever been recovered. Their statement ends with a chilling line. Continued speculation only causes unnecessary distress to the families. But you've spoken to the families. Distress is all they've had for decades. Now the theories fracture into 3 terrifying possibilities. A cover-up. The plane crashed, but authorities hid the wreckage for reasons unknown. A secret experiment. The aircraft was intercepted, taken to a restricted site, its passengers silenced. A dimensional rift. The storm that night wasn't natural. The plane entered something beyond science and never came back. Each theory points to the same outcome. Each theory circles back to the same code. And then, just when you're convinced the trail has gone cold, you receive a call from an unlisted number. A man's voice, distorted, whispers through static. You're looking in the wrong place. It's not about where the plane went. It's about why it was chosen. The line goes dead. No name, no location. Only one final message appears on your screen before the number vanishes forever. 3 letters, 4 numbers, the code again. But this time, it isn't written. It's glowing. The voice on the phone still lingers in your ears. It's not about where the plane went. It's about why it was chosen. Chosen. The word sticks like a splinter. You've heard cover-up theories, military theories, even Cold War espionage. But chosen suggests something different. Something more deliberate. And in the Amazon, deliberate often hides inside the supernatural. In a remote village, deep beyond the main river channels, you meet an old shaman named Tupan. His skin is marked with decades of sun, his eyes clouded, but unblinking. When you mention Flight 508, he raises a hand. Do not speak the number, he says. The forest remembers. You sit across from him, the fire casting his face in shifting gold. There are doors here, he whispers. Invisible doors. Some open only once. Some lead nowhere. Some take what is not theirs. He leans closer. That night the storm was not a storm. It was a mouth, and the sky swallowed the metal bird. You want to dismiss it as folklore. But his words sound almost identical to the scientist's warning about shadow windows. 2 men worlds apart describing the same phenomenon. Coincidence? Or confirmation? And then there's the strangest story of all. A group of loggers once claimed they stumbled upon a clearing where a plane sat intact, silent, covered in vines as if it had been there for decades. They swore they saw figures through the windows, motionless, pale eyes wide open but never blinking. One of the loggers, now an old man, describes it with trembling hands. They were alive, but not alive, watching us, waiting. When they returned days later with others, the clearing was gone. Not the wreckage, not the passengers, the entire clearing, as if the forest itself had rearranged to protect a secret. But wait, this isn't the only account. Two other witnesses, miles apart, claim to have seen phantom lights hovering in the sky in the exact corridor where Flight 508 vanished. Lights that moved too fast, too precise to be lightning. Lights that blinked in patterns that resembled the same sequence of numbers and letters, the code, written in the sky. You contact a man named Victor Hale, a paranormal researcher who has tracked unexplained vanishings across the globe. He draws comparisons. Flight 19, the squadron lost in the Bermuda Triangle. MH370, the Malaysian plane, that disappeared in 2014. Even reports of entire ships vanishing into fog banks. Patterns repeat, Hale insists. They're not random. Certain vessels, certain flights, they're targeted. Targeted. That word again. By whom, you ask? He only smiles. Not by whom, by what? Later, a recording technician analyzes the mysterious cassette again. Using advanced filtering, he removes the static and amplifies the background. What emerges chills you to the bone. Behind the woman's voice, behind the words, "We're still here," is something else. A low hum. Rhythmic, pulsing, almost mechanical. Like engines still running, but if the plane's engines were still alive, where could it possibly be? More families come forward with eerie accounts. A father claims he dreamt of his daughter knocking on the window every night for a week, her face pressed against glass streaked with rain. Another woman says she woke to the sound of jet engines above her house, though no flights were scheduled. And Renata, the mother who lost her little boy, says she sometimes hears his laughter in the walls. It's easy to dismiss as grief. But why do so many families describe the same sounds, the same visions decades apart? And then, as if the mystery itself refuses to stay quiet, something unexplainable happens. During a stormy night in 2003, an airport control tower in Belém receives a brief, fragmented transmission on an unused frequency. The signal lasts only 18 seconds, static, cracking, and then a voice. Male, calm, professional. This is Flight 508 requesting landing clearance, fuel low. The signal cuts. Controllers check every radar screen. Nothing. No blip. No aircraft. No explanation. The strangest part, the voice matches the captain of Flight 508. But he had been missing for 16 years. The transmission from 2003 refuses to fade from your mind. This is Flight 508 requesting landing clearance. A voice pulled out of time, calling from nowhere. But if the plane is still out there, who or what is keeping it from returning? The deeper you look, the more the story stops being about a missing flight and starts becoming about a hidden war. In Washington, you request declassified Cold War documents. Buried in thousands of pages about Latin American surveillance, one memo catches your eye, dated July 1987, marked Eyes Only. It describes an unexplained aerial event over the Amazon basin and notes the loss of one civilian craft. But the part that freezes you is this: joint recovery operations to proceed under Project Seraphim, maintain total denial to press, assets must not be compromised. Project Seraphim, a name that doesn't exist anywhere else, a name that feels less like science and more like scripture. You reach out to a retired intelligence analyst. He won't let you record. He won't even give you his real name. But he leans across the table and whispers, flights disappeared in other places too. Central Africa, the Arctic, over oceans, always in areas rich with anomalies. Brazil was just one theater. What happened to the wreckage? You ask. He smiles, but his eyes stay cold. Wreckage? Who said there was wreckage? Sometimes it was passengers they wanted, sometimes it was the data, and sometimes it was neither. But wait, what if the goal wasn't to find the plane at all? What if the goal was to study what took it? Digging deeper, you find the personal belongings of Gabriel Duarte, the reporter who vanished in 1988. Among them, a cassette marked simply 508. On it, Duarte speaks hurriedly into a recorder. They're moving debris to a site north of Manaus. It's not just Brazilians. I've seen Americans, trucks with no plates. They're building something. Tents, labs, fenced perimeters. It's not recovery, it's research. Then the sound of engines. Footsteps. Duarte's breathing grows frantic. The tape ends in mid-sentence. He was never seen again. Months later, satellite images confirm something astonishing. At the very coordinates from the bottle, the same sequence you've seen again and again, there was a facility in 1987, rows of tents, a runway. But within 2 years, the jungle had reclaimed it completely. Now nothing remains but scars in the canopy, rectangular outlines barely visible from above, almost as if the forest was ordered to forget. You managed to speak to a military pilot, long retired, who once flew over the restricted zone. He swears he saw something on the ground. Not wreckage, he says. Not a crash site, the whole plane. Intact. Parked like someone had landed it. You lean in. And the passengers? He shakes his head slowly. Still inside, still strapped to their seats. You ask if they were alive. He looks away. They didn't look dead, but they didn't look alive either. And here's where everything unravels, because if the plane was intact, if the passengers were still inside, why didn't anyone bring them home? One more document surfaces, an intercepted cable between U.S. and Brazilian intelligence. It reads, Seraphim containment successful. Flight sealed. Do not attempt recovery. Recommend indefinite isolation. Indefinite isolation. As if the passengers of Flight 508 weren't lost, but imprisoned. And then, while poring over the affiliate, you notice something strange on the last page. Not typed, not stamped, handwritten, a single line scribbled in blue ink across the bottom margin. They are not gone. They are kept. Below it, one last time, the same 3 letters and 4 numbers. The code that has followed you since the first seat cushion on the river. Only this time, it's underlined twice. As if whoever wrote it wanted you to understand. The truth isn't just hidden, it's guarded. The deeper you go, the less it feels like a story about a missing plane, and more like a story about a place. A place where rules don't work. A place where the sky and the jungle share secrets they will never give up easily. And somehow, Flight 508 was chosen to be part of it. Late one night, you overlay all the scraps you've collected, the maps, the military notes, the coordinates from the bottle, and something terrifying happens. When aligned correctly, the numbers don't just mark a spot. They form a shape, a corridor. A straight line that runs across the Amazon basin, a path that stretches further than radar could follow. And at the center of this line, directly where Flight 508 vanished, there's a blank space on every map. A hole where geography refuses to exist. You finally track down a former air controller, long retired, who monitored the skies that night. His voice trembles when he recalls the last moments. The plane didn't just disappear, he says. It accelerated off the screen too fast for any aircraft. You ask if he could have misread it. He leans closer. His breath smells of fear. I've seen radar glitches. This wasn't one. It was like something pulled it forward. And then, nothing. But wait. Forward to where? At last, one final leak reaches you. A photocopied report stamped Seraphim. Inside, a chilling line. Subject vessel observed reappearing intermittently in uncharted airspace. Status of occupants, unresponsive but stable. Recommend continued isolation. Reappearing. Not gone. Not destroyed. Reappearing. Which means Flight 508 still exists. somewhere. And then, the most disturbing evidence of all, a photo, grainy, supposedly taken by a satellite in 1998. It shows dense jungle, a clearing, and in the center, an aircraft. Whole, rusted, but unmistakably the same model as Flight 508. Through the canopy, shadows of figures appear in the windows, still seated, still waiting, like mannequins of flesh. Now everything collides. Was Flight 508 pulled into a secret program? Was it caught in a rift in time, forced to repeat itself in fragments? Or is it something darker? A bargain made during the Cold War? A sacrifice of 120 souls for knowledge never meant for the public? Each theory terrifies. Each theory explains only part of the truth, but none explain why the same code appears over and over again. And then one night as you review every scrap, your shortwave radio crackles alive. Not static, not noise, a voice, calm, male, professional. This is Flight 508, requesting clearance. You freeze. The same words as before, but this time, another voice cuts in. A woman's, whispering, almost crying. They won't let us leave. The radio dies. So now you're left with the most haunting possibility of all. Flight 508 isn't lost. It isn't destroyed. It isn't even in another world. It's still here, stuck in a loop, held by hands, human or not, that refuse to let go. And if that's true, you have to ask yourself, was this a tragedy of nature? A secret Cold War experiment? Or something far beyond human understanding? What do you think happened to the ghost? Flight of 1987? Was it a government cover-up? A supernatural abduction? Or a rift in reality itself? Tell us your theory in the comments below, because some stories were never meant to stay buried. Don't let them vanish. Keep them alive with us.